and welcome to episode 94 of Random Encounter, the RPG fan podcast. I'm your host, Robert Steinman, Pale Robbie on the boards. Joining me today is Stephen Bloodstarved Meyerink.
That is me. Indeed.
Yes, you are the
I'm
Bloodstarved.
no longer blood-starved, though, because I drank about 400,000 blood vials fighting the blood-starved beast.
We'll catch up. We'll give like a 5-minute update on your trials through Yharnam and Bloodborne, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that today because we have new stuff to talk about, and you have to act as a salesman today to try to get me to buy Pillars of Eternity, and that's along with...
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually fairly used to trying to sell things to people that I shouldn't have to sell them. For example, happiness.
Yes. All right, we also have from the last podcast, Mike Solosi's back.
Hi, I'm Mike, Monsoon on the boards, and I have not played Bloodborne because I don't have a PS4.
Yeah, and you just decided to start off the pre-show warm-up in a great way by comparing Bloodborne to, what was it, Monster Hunter? And Steven and I almost like went through the internet.
I do not disagree with him that there are a lot of Monster Hunter elements in Bloodborne. I just think Bloodborne and the Souls games generally have tighter controls.
That's fair. That's fair.
And that's a matter of opinion.
Yeah, well, I say things like there would be no Dark Souls or Bloodborne without Monster Hunter just to make myself feel better for wasting 400 plus hours of my life on the PSP Monster Hunter games, and I'll never get that time back. So yeah, that's don't play PSP Monster Hunter, guys. Don't let your friends play Monster Hunter either.
Friends don't let friends play PSP Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got some games to talk about this week and some news stories. We're gonna talk a little bit about Valve kind of pulling a 180 in the span of a week, which I think is pretty good, but also shows some interesting directions about where the industry is going. Talk about the burning car wreck that is Konami. And how sad and angry that makes me, so I apologize if I get pretty heated when we start talking about that stuff. But first, just give us like a 5-minute rundown, Steven. You had to finish up Pillars of Eternity, so you didn't have a lot of time to traverse Yharnam as a hunter. Are you still enjoying Bloodborne?
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's definitely probably more streamlined than I would like. It's clear that there isn't really a whole lot of interesting experimentation with weapon paths and leveling up. It's very much a just dump all your points into whatever weapon stat you want to use. And, from what I've seen of my roommate playing it later in the game, it sort of seems like, all of the weapons sort of balance out with their stat bonuses anyway. So, that I don't like, but on the other hand, it also is the tightest atmosphere and tightest game they've ever built in this vein. The boss design is phenomenal. I was stuck on the Bloodstarved Beast, and we have determined that it's more due to my underleveledness than anything else.
Steven's like, man, I think I might be underleveled. I'm like level 22, and I'm like, Steven, I fight him at like 40. Like, I go into that fight because your level is tied into your physical defense, and that's huge in that game.
So I would get through the first 2 phases without even getting hit, and then die in 1 hit against the 3rd phase. Like, it would chomp me once, and I would just insta-die. So we decided gaining a few levels was a good idea.
Yep. I think I've played through the game about 5 or 6 times now. I really like restarting the game. I think it doesn't have as much of a new game plus... I actually think Dark Souls 2 does a better job of incentivizing you to play New Game Plus with new items and some weapons that you can only make on New Game Plus, but Bloodborne kind of loses a little bit of that, so I love restarting characters and like going through again. I really like the progression path of the weapons and the characters.
Well, and also I just think the moment-to-moment exploration and combat is tighter than it's ever been in Bloodborne.
Yep.
Like, every place you go is sort of interesting, and... Again, the survival horror aspect just makes the game, to me, utterly compelling, because it's like, I was having this conversation recently, but it's the definition of survival horror in that that there are monsters that can one-shot you down that hallway, and you have to go down that hallway to progress.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to belabor the point. I think Bloodborne is still an absolutely fantastic game. I still love it. I find myself going back to it over and over again, but not the same way as Demon Souls or Dark Souls, where I'm doing a lot of different experimentations. Like, yeah, I've tried out different weapons, but mostly what I just love is the moment-to-moment fighting, the bosses. Like,
The threaded cane is the coolest thing ever. Like, you just walk around whipping around.
So wrong.
Look, the axe is not cool. The axe is, I'm a long weapon that you stab people with. No, let's be honest, Rob. Come on.
Okay, the L2 on the axe is like the best attack in the entire game.
The L2 on the axe is a big swipe, much like every other axe attack in every other game.
No, it's a longer swipe.
Whereas the threaded cane...
We're so wrong.
As the Belmont folks would have said before Konami torched that series... the threaded cane is like, oh, that guy's off to the left. I know my arc will hit him over there, and I'm whipping around. And no, the threaded cane is the clear best weapon at the start.
It must hurt to live in that delusional world, but I will allow it. I will allow it. But yeah, still a fantastic game. I think that if you're really looking for something that you want to play on your next generation console, the PlayStation 4, you kind of have to do it. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to play it. So
I would say it is probably the strongest console exclusive that PS4 has. Because I mean, again, The Last of Us is also a PS3 game. It's better on PS4, but it's very lengthy. It's replayable because it's fun, and it's just it's this very deep, fun experience that while it's not quite as deep as the other Souls games, it's just you sit down and you play it, and it is nothing but fun, and it's challenging in the right ways. It doesn't cheese you. I got to one part, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but I entered an area and was killed by a man with a sack.
Oh God. Yeah.
And something very different happened, and that was terrifying.
Yep.
And I even sort of knew that it was coming, and it was still like, oh wow, this is incredibly creepy. So they're doing things in this game narratively that I think the other Souls games didn't do. So it's a lot of these sort of small refinements to that formula that when you think back to, oh, Dark Souls is a great game, I'm going to go play it. But when you actually sit down and play it, it's like, wow, Bloodborne made a lot of advancements in a lot of areas. Just in the feel of weapons. Because again, there are fewer weapons, but man, they're all so different. Like it's way more exciting to find a weapon in Bloodborne.
Yep. So we could talk about it all day, but I think we want to move on. I don't want our listeners getting mad at us. So if you haven't already, go out and play Bloodborne. But
oh, you done talking about Bloodborne?
I mean, it's not my fault you're wrong. You haven't even given the game a fair shot. That's fine. Just be closed-minded.
Well, I mean, the reason I haven't given the game a fair shot is because I have a mortgage to pay that can't go towards a PS4, and I probably would try it if I did have a PS4. But I'm proud of you guys. That was right around 5 minutes.
Yeah, we did what we could. We were trying to be nice. Now let's talk about Diablo 3. No, I'm just kidding. No, I am kidding.
New hotfixes out today.
I guess
okay. Actually, I would like to hear about Oreshika.
Well, I was just about to say, if you were talking about Diablo 3, I'd have to pour some shots. But I can talk about Oreshika if you want.
Yes, please.
I have no idea what this is.
It is super weird. I mean, I first heard about this game in, I think around a year ago when they were announcing that it might, probably on RPG Fan, that they were announcing it might come over to the United States. But in Japan, it's Oreshika 2, because the first Oreshika game is a 1999 PlayStation 1 game that was sort of a cult hit, Japan only. I had never heard of it, and it has this Vita follow-up in 2014 in Japan that was brought to the United States, digital only, Vita only, in the first or second week of March of this year. And which is also coincidentally right around the time I bought a Vita and was looking for something to play on it. And after finishing Persona 4 Golden and East Memories of Celceta, I looked at this Oreshika thing, and man, it is weird but really interesting. And the premise alone just really blew my mind a little bit, because it's set in feudal Japan. Around 1,000 years ago, you're the head of a clan that gets betrayed by somebody in the court and murdered and cursed. And what you're trying to do is break the curse on your clan with created characters and the assistance of some gods. And there's a lot going on here, because the curse that's on your clan means that no one in your clan can live for more than 2 years. So what you have is a bunch of characters that are mostly randomly generated that you have to raise into fighting shape in sort of game months that pass along in a calendar, sort of like Persona 3 or Persona 4. And so characters are born, then they're ready to fight around 4 months, and then around 14 or 16 months they start getting old and dying, and they're all dead, and they're guaranteed dead before they hit 2 years old. That sounds strange, I know. But
well, there are much stranger concepts in the world. For example, Valkyrie Profile is about raising dead people to a certain level before you send them to Valhalla.
I
So
guess it's sort of like that, but yeah, you're this clan of people that are making pacts with gods to create new babies and fight in dungeons to raise gold to build up your little town and improve your equipment, and also generate praise, which allows you to get to make pacts with bigger and more expensive and more powerful gods that will result in powerful children. And like I remember the first god I made a pact with was a dark skinned blonde hair earth goddess of some kind. There's about like 200 gods in the game, and they're all from some corner of Japanese folklore. They and so all of my children from that goddess ended up being dark skinned and blonde haired. So I have all these like Gonguro characters in that side of the family tree now. But the game has that sort of weird, interesting premise of you're trying to break this curse in your family, but I'm not sure the rest of the gameplay really lives up to the premise because you're crashing a dungeon that has enemies walking around visible in the dungeon. You encounter them, turn-based battles. The turn-based battles are pretty straightforward, and I think the problem that I had with it is the lack of variety for most of it, because there's 8 classes in the game and you only start with 3, and of 3 of your choice, and you collect the other 5 but from random drops. And I was a little unlucky with random drops, so my first 5 or 6 hours of the game I was going through a couple generations of characters, and I can only have them as these 3 frontline classes that I unwisely chose at the beginning.
So I'm a little curious on sort of that note. Is there sort of like a meta level of strategy in like how you're picking your god and like your classes versus like the children? Like, sort of like how in like Darkest Dungeon, it's not necessarily just about the choices you make on one character, but as a whole that you're making strategically when you put together a party or something like that.
Yeah, there's some. There's a variety of elemental stats that each character has, sort of a balance of 4 elements, and by making pacts with gods that have different concentrations and levels of elements will affect the children's affinities and stats and things of that nature. But there's not a whole lot in the way of special skills. Almost everything comes from random enemy drops, or like finding special rare enemies that you can only kill with certain conditions, like having a certain class in the party or having a certain skill equipped when you're fighting the demon. It's a lot of like the game doesn't really communicate things to you that much with the special objectives that it has, and most of the variety is whether you put a character in the front row or back row, which affects what kind of attacks the class can make. And I, again, unwisely, I picked 3 classes at the beginning that are all sort of frontline classes. The game's roughly half frontline and half backline classes, and I was just hacking and pressing A for attack for the first several hours of the game. And sort of early on, the one special character in the game joins you. She's a goddess named Nueko that is, basically sympathizes with your clan's plight, and you can have Nueko reincarnate into your party through a similar god pact system, but a little bit different from other children. And
Basically because reasons.
yeah, because reasons. And she has some attacks that seem a little too powerful when you're just running through random dungeons, and she needs to be present if you defeat a guardian. That is one of the requirements for making real progress in the game. So sometimes there's not enough variety, sometimes it's really unclear what you're supposed to do to complete a certain objective, and sometimes it really feels random and arbitrary. But in general, it depends on what your grind tolerance for this kind of game is, I guess, but I'm mostly having a good time with it because I like seeing the numbers get higher as I build up my base and make new kids. I like the dungeons are, if not super interesting or elaborate, they're at least they're not so bad. I mean, they're all sort of Japanese themed.
It actually sounds like a roguelike to me, honestly. Like it sounds like there are a lot of components of it that remind me actually of Darkest Dungeon. Maybe not quite as punishing, but
Well, like it can
in
get
the
kind of
whole
punishing.
it makes it sound like very much like a roguelike to me, and that's what makes it sound interesting to me. Aside from the heavy Japanese influences.
Yeah, I actually had a bit of a Okami vibe from it, just because it doesn't look as good as Okami, which is a gorgeous game in many, many ways. But it has like brushstroke sort of inky art for the attacks. Everything's very heavily influenced by Japanese myth and folklore, and yeah, I think Amaterasu was one of the gods that you can make a pact with, but I'm not positive about that. I wish it was a little bit better. I wish that all the classes were unlockable from the beginning. I wish that there was more of a sort of like skill customization that just didn't have everything generated by random drops. But it is not bad. I am enjoying most of what I'm playing, and its premise is so interesting and unique that I want to see it through to the end, but I'm not sure it lives up to that interesting premise.
Well, if it's not a total waste of time, that's good too.
Oh, it's not a
Like,
total waste. I'm probably being too negative on it. I'm enjoying it. I have about 15 or 16 hours in it. I should mention at the very beginning, you're allowed to choose your pace, whether like right when you start the game and design your clan's outfit and symbol and everything. It says, what pace do you want to play at? Casual, 10 hours to beat it. Standard, 30 hours to beat it. I picked the standard one, but I think the range was like 10, 30, 50, or 90, or some
that's
number similar
interesting.
to that.
So they're
So
sort of letting you play with the randomization element to change the pace of the game.
yeah, basically they're letting you pick exactly how much you want to put into it. And the standard 30 seemed about right for me. I went into this game knowing almost nothing about it. So it's it's unique, it's interesting, but a little too grindy, and I sort of wish that there was more variety. But um yeah, and also Sony released it in the first or second week of March, and I didn't hear hardly a drop about it.
Yeah,
It's
well, what's weird about it is that you mentioned it, and I was like, that sounds familiar, and it's because we did news stories on it. But I was like, I don't think they've talked about it at all. And then they put it on the PlayStation blog, and it's like, maybe talk about these games you're releasing a little more.
Well, and if anything, Sony has a serious problem right now, or at least a perceived serious problem, where there aren't a lot of big exclusives to talk about now that Bloodborne's out. You know what I mean? Like they're not there. We have a lot of crossplay. We have a lot of titles releasing on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Good lord, that new Mad Max looks amazing. But like, there's nothing really big for them to talk about. So here you have a game that they could kind of champion a little bit here, and they're kind of not doing anything. It seems
Well,
like they're a little off message.
well, especially given that it's for the Vita. Like
Yeah.
the fact that I write for an RPG site and only barely had a conception of this game speaks to the fact that it's not being advertised enough. Because you don't seem super down on it. It sounds like it has flaws, but it's still worth playing. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that Sony should be pushing on Vita, because it's not like, there's this one killer app. Oh, I went and bought a console. But it's like, every time you have a pretty good game, that adds value to it. And they're trying, well, they're sort of not trying to sell Vitas anymore, but they should be.
Yeah,
And these are the kinds of things that add to that.
I remember reading about it when it came out in Japan last year, and then when I was looking for things to put on my Vita, I wasn't even aware that this thing had come out. It was like, hey, I think I went on Twitter or some other forums saying, hey, does anyone know about this game? Am I like the only person in America playing this? And it is really under everyone's radar, and it got okay reviews in the American press. It it actually came out. There's very little in the way of localization. There's a lot of Japanese voice work and no English language voice work at all, but
Well,
everything's translated, of course.
to be fair, I think certain games do better with Japanese voice work,
Sure.
and not in a it's better but in like Muramasa. Muramasa is a better game with Japanese voice acting, because to shoehorn English into that would have sort of cut out some of the tone of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about altering the tone of the game, but I totally get that this would make less sense with English language voice work. And the Japanese voice work, most of it's from the little sort of tutorial demon that follows you, like Weasel Girl thing that follows you around and explains things to you. That's most of the voice work, but I mean, it's there. And
How's the music?
yeah, it is very Japanese influenced. Shamisen taiko drums, Japanese flute thing. It's all right. It gets a little bit repetitive since like the first several dungeons have a very very similar taiko beat to them that gets a little repetitive, And once I liked the music the first time I heard it, but running the same dungeons over and over, I switched to listening to a podcast and making it a podcast game, like I did with Torchlight for Our Civilization.
Perhaps your friendly neighborhood music podcast.
Perhaps it could have an inclusion, especially the very, very cool end credit song and opening intro song. Both of those might make a friendly neighborhood music podcast in the future.
I'm charging you for 2 plugs of your podcast on this show, Steven. Just throwing that out there because you'll do it
2
again.
out of 20.
Hey, you know, we've plugged it enough because people are coming to us to ask about the show.
I know, isn't that awesome? That
It
is
is.
pretty amazing. Okay, so it sounds like this is an interesting title. Like it ain't gonna set the world on fire, but it's something, which is kind of neat.
It is something unique and weird on the Vita, and if you go in there expecting that and don't mind a little bit of grind in your RPG, then it is worth looking into.
Considering all of us have professed love for Persona 4, we all clearly don't mind a little
Yes.
grind.
No. I think a little bit of grind is fine in my JRPG. I was thinking about this the other day because I was grinding a little bit in Bloodborne because I wanted to get some special rocks to upgrade my axe because why wouldn't you upgrade the axe unless you're Steven and wrong? But I don't.
Sorry, I just like to do things other than attack with the same weapon I've attacked with in 300 other games.
Yeah, sure. Okay, whatever.
Well, I don't, because axes are lame, but that's neither here nor there.
Fine, whatever. But I think that the grind doesn't bother me, and grinding in Persona 3 and Persona 4 never bothered me because the combat was so quick, snappy, and fun. And I think Xenoblade was also pretty good about that. Those are games that the core combat is really fun, whereas, I'm looking right now at my desk up at Radiant Historia up there, not to bag on that game, but I really didn't enjoy that game's combat, so
Actually,
suddenly
I was
grind...
Sorry to cut you off. I agree. While he was talking about it, I actually sort of thought the same thing, where that whole game is great. The combat system is sort of bland.
Yeah, exactly. And that can... JRPGs kind of live or die by their combat systems, in my opinion. I very famously didn't like Final Fantasy 13, but the people that liked it talk about how much they love the combat system. Me, I didn't really enjoy it that much. That's kind of the make or break for these games. And so if you have a combat system that's not really going to hold my attention, how can you expect me to play it for 50 hours?
Yeah, something like 60 or 70% of the combat in Orishika is, can I attack the front row or the back row, and how much damage can I do?
Yeah.
That's actually very Radiant Historia.
Yeah. I mean, the enemy variety is also very important, especially in action RPGs. It's really fun to fight different enemies in Diablo and see them blow up in different ways. And I think the expansion did a really good job of adding new enemy types that do new things. Those things are really important in video games.
If you like palette swaps of a variety of Japanese oni, then I have a game for you. Do I have a game for you?
And see,
Yeah.
palette swaps are interesting because I don't mind a palette swap. Palette swap. I don't mind.
I like video games.
I'm gonna work on my accents there.
Your
I don't
diction?
I don't mind a palette swap provided that maybe the enemy gets some new attacks or something new. I actually think Rogue Legacy was really good about that. I don't even want to describe to the listeners that my wife completely maxed out the upgrade tree in Rogue Legacy. Okay, somebody's playing something. I hear Link in the background.
Sorry, I actually did that on purpose. I am listening to your wife, Rogue Legacy.
Yeah, she completely maxed out the upgrade path. But as she's playing this game on her new game plus or whatever it is right now, she's still fighting new enemies that, even though they're palette swaps, they have different attack patterns or they're doing new things. So that's actually a smart game that doesn't have a whole lot of enemy variety in terms of the sprites, but manages to do unique things with them. I think that's pretty cool.
I will not make any claim like that for Orishika at all, except for bosses.
Oh boy. Well, it sounds interesting. Sounds like a JRPG for people to go after as we sit here patiently or not so patiently awaiting Persona 5, Final Fantasy 15. Is it
Xenoblade X?
Xenoblade?
Which was out in Japan as of this recording.
Yes, it is out.
Oh my god, I watch streams. I need that game. Any skepticism I had is gone.
Does it? I didn't.
Very different. It's different from Xenoblade, but it looks like sci-fi Xenoblade, but they went all the way with the tone.
Yeah, I didn't watch a whole lot of the streams. I watched a little bit of the exploration. The exploration looks great. Do you feel like our concerns about the main character, like does he or she talk in cutscenes and
So
stuff?
it seems like he's silent, which is a bummer, but
Yeah.
he or she is involved in the story.
You can do
And
it properly.
I actually spoiled a little bit of the beginning only because I was really curious as to whether or not the character would be a character. So I wouldn't expect Shulk. It's not like he's going to be running around like "Rah, Fiora!"
I'm really
But,
feeling it.
but he's in all of the cutscenes. I'm saying he because the streams I watch are mostly dudes. And like there seem to be narrative elements that revolve around your character. And it still has those like really dramatic Xenoblade cutscenes. Like there was one where like your character's running to save somebody and cool stuff happens. So not to hijack or anything, but no, it looks cool. I'm excited. It looks different from Xenoblade, and certainly it has a little more open worldiness to it. But it also seems to have it seems to be the sci-fi RPG that we've wanted from Star Ocean since Star Ocean was first made.
Yeah, and I got a very strong Xenosaga vibe in the art style. Like I think when I kind of backed up and looked at it again, I'm like, oh, okay.
I would say tone-wise, from what I've seen, it's sort of its own thing. But because of the music being Sawano and like just the scale of it and having the dolls or the what do they call them, skells in English?
Something I think dolls was perfectly fine, but whatever.
Yeah, exo skells. It has much more of a Xenogears and Xenosaga, like very dramatic, weighty tone to it. Not that Xenoblade wasn't weighty, but Xenoblade was a little more like friendly in terms of its atmosphere, whereas the Gears and Sagas of the world are much darker and sort of more severe.
How long do you think it's going to take you before you fight a boss that is named God or something similar?
There are Zohars in the trailer. I don't think it'll take
that
serious?
Okay, that makes me kind of happy. When do we think we get that in America? I would say maybe. I think there's a very slim possibility for late this year.
Actually, you would be mistaken then, because they've already confirmed it's 2015.
Okay.
On a recent Nintendo Direct.
Because Nintendo never delays.
People are arguing Zelda, but Zelda is a game that is not even halfway done. Xenoblade is a game that is completely done, that's been being localized since the beginning of the year.
I find it interesting, not to go away from Xenoblade too fast, but I find it interesting on all the podcasts that I've listened to, people are really poo-pooing the internet response to, oh, the next Zelda will be on the next generation console, and people are like, no, there's absolutely no way that's happening. I don't think they're hearing the argument. My argument would be, I think it's going to be possibly on both.
If you that straddle it just like
sure,
Twilight Princess did?
Sure, why the hell not?
I don't think that new hardware is going to be a console.
That's also.
I think it's going to be a set-top box that plays Wii U games.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because I don't think the Wii U has fulfilled the promise of it. The Wii U has never made or has yet to make a good argument for that screen. So why not just say, you know what? We're going to keep this architecture. We're going to keep making games for it, because the games look fantastic. I mean, Mario in HD.
Nintendo does more with PS3 level hardware than most people have ever done.
You know what? I would actually have zero problem if they released a Wii U console, took the damn second screen out, which would make some games obsolete. I understand that. No Zombu or whatever like that.
No Xenoblade.
No, would Xenoblade require it?
Xenoblade does quite a bit on the touchscreen, from what I understand.
Okay. That's cool. But I wouldn't mind picking up a console that was $50 less and not have to worry about that screen.
I hope that this new thing that Nintendo's working on has connectivity between the Wii U and the 3DS, because Nintendo's really making their money with the 3DS right now.
My God, that's so good, yeah.
If there was some additional levels of intercommunication between the two devices, or between the 3DS and this new thing, or this new thing and the Wii U, it's all speculation at this point. But if they could, have more interconnectivity between their devices, sort of like how Sony was trying to do with the Vita before they abandoned that burning, sinking ship.
Well, to be fair, they also do very well with cross-play and cross-buy. I mean, I got Broken Age, I have it on everything. I got Shovel Knight, I have it on everything. So they may not be advertising it, but the fact is, when you buy something on the PlayStation Network, you're getting quite a bit of value for whatever you just bought.
Yeah, they're doing
that's
a better
not
job.
For every game, but for several things, yes.
But for a lot of games.
You can't do that for Final Fantasy X, which was a bummer for me, who bought it for
that's
the
a
PS3
bummer. That's
before
a bummer,
the Vita.
But Nintendo doesn't even make sense with what they're doing.
And actually, I feel like this new console and their partnership with DNA is actually going to change that, because
Oh, you
they
think it might have some kind of mobile integration in this new console? What's the code name for it again? It has a name.
the NX. But no,
That's
what the
it.
thing is that Nintendo is letting DNA handle their online infrastructure and their like sort of like distribution and stuff. So I'm expecting that moving forward, you're going to see better interconnectivity between the Nintendo shops because they're better than they were, but they still sort of suck.
Yeah.
I thought it was inexcusable that they had the Wii shop, Wii U shop, and 3DS shop unable to communicate with each other. You can't even
I would agree with you.
you can't
Yeah,
even
well-
you can't even get money in one shop and have it appear in other shops.
I-
That's an embarrassment.
Like I am
absolutely-
only now impressed that when I start Smash Brothers, it's like, hey, there's a patch, and I'm like, oh my god, a Nintendo console recognized there was a patch, and I didn't have to go and search for it by the glossary.
I honest to God hate turning on my 3DS because I'll leave it off for like a month and then come back to it. And when I turn it on, it needs to update. I need to remember my password. I need to hit this. I need to hit that. It is. I end up
Your password
screaming.
update.
I end up. No, for whatever reason, it won't hold the password sometimes. So I need to remember what my login was for the Nintendo eShop or whatever. And I'm just like, I want to
To at
throw it
least
across
be
the room.
fair, if it's not their fault you can't remember your password.
But it's also not fair that it is so cumbersome and slow.
It is, yes, it is that.
It's so nasty. Like, and they really. I'm sorry, there are too many patches. There are too many patches, and until you have what like Sony's doing, and I think Xbox One does it as well, where it will download the patch if the system's in rest mode and have it all uploaded and ready. When the Bloodborne patch came out, that thing was ready to go when I turned on my console. I got home that day. Hey Rob, time to play some Bloodborne, dude. We got this thing ready for you. Let's do
Well,
this.
I mean, Sony and Microsoft had 7 or 8 years of mucking around on the PS3 and 360 before they could really figure out how the patching and loading and pre-downloading technology could, be a lot smoother. And this is a brave, scary new world for Nintendo.
Yes,
And
Nintendo
honestly,
still can't get voice chat right.
yeah, Nintendo's lucky that they make so many good games every year because their online infrastructure is a mess.
Yeah, but anywho, getting back to what kind of brought us here, I'm
Bravely second.
I'm not saying that Zelda is going to skip the Wii U and go directly to this next console, but I don't think that it is completely crazy to imagine that this game that is not going to be seen at E3 apparently and will probably not be coming out until next holiday season at the earliest. I don't think it's crazy to imagine that you might have a new console out and it's on both. I don't think that's nuts at all. Are they going to completely not release it for the Wii U? No, that's crazy. Because then you are officially saying we're not supporting this console anymore.
It is absolutely coming out on the Wii U.
Yes,
Maybe it will
definitely.
come out on another console, but they sort of have recently attempted to embrace the particular quirks of the hardware, but there's nothing saying that the next one won't have a screen in the controller.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm pretty.
Because again, I feel like it's just going to be a Wii U set-top box.
Yeah. I'm pretty
It-
close to buying a Wii U. The Fatal Frame announcement has me very interested. That's a series that I want to get into more. I own the first 2 games as PlayStation Classics. I want to play that. And I want to play Xenoblade, and I want to play Zelda. I'm about ready to jump. So yeah, I mean, they have the games that are out there, and Nintendo produces amazing titles. Like, everybody knows that. Like, I may not be interested in the newest Mario Kart, but I would be a damn fool to say that it's not a great game that's going to sell units. Of course it is. I'm just not that interested in it.
That's totally fair. And I mean, I'm with you. I think that if this NX new device is a Wii U Plus or whatever you want to call it, then the new Zelda could straddle those 2 generations just like how Twilight Princess did.
And
That's totally
and
reasonable.
the best version of Twilight Princess was on GameCube, and everybody knows it.
I only played the Wii one, and I had no problem with it. But apparently everyone says I'm a heathen for that, because Link is all like, I'm right-handed.
I don't care about that. I just think that game controlled fine with a controller. Like it.
It controlled fine with the Wii remote, though. All you did was shake the remote occasionally to attack or something. Or you could just press the A button.
I'm not bringing up Skyward Sword again. I'm not getting into that.
I actually owned a guide.
Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess are very different in terms of controls.
Yeah, one's a good Zelda game and one's not.
I actually had a guide for Twilight Princess because I think they were phasing them out, so it cost 1 penny, and it was for the Wii version, but I had the GameCube version, so all of the maps were
yeah, they flipped them.
mirrored.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit trying to use the guide as within the dungeons was an interesting experience. That was like a second puzzle on top of the actual puzzle in the dungeon.
When you say interesting experience, do you mean horrifying nightmare or interesting experience?
Like first there's anger, then acceptance, then you sort of like it a little bit. Not sure what a good metaphor for that is.
You know what game series you might want to try out, Mike? It's called the Souls series. Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Dark Souls. Kind of the same progression.
Actually, I would probably skip Dark Souls too, but yeah.
It's the Souls series.
I would probably go back and play Demon Souls now. I kind of want to.
I actually own Demon Souls and Dark Souls, but just never really made it more than 90 minutes into either of them.
That's depressing. Okay. So we got a little sidetracked there. So, Steven.
Yes.
Tell me about Pillars of Eternity. I've been waiting for this. And
Pillars of Eternity.
I've been sitting here debating whether or not I want to take this plunge because Divinity, a little bit of history, and you put it into your review, which I really liked. And yes, I did read your review, Steven. I love you, and I read your review. You bring up Divinity and Wasteland 2, and I think those two titles have me very snake bit right now on the classic CRPG because you have. Let me just finish real quick. Divinity, I am but a simple caveman, and I cannot understand Divinity. It intimidates and confuses me. God rest your soul, Phil Hartman. Yes, I'm using your Saturday Night Live sketch. And Wasteland 2 was a little
boring,
cumbersome and boring. I wanted to like that game more than I wanted to, but I think that it kind of missed some of the modern things that have happened in gaming that make a more pleasant experience. So, with that in mind, begin.
So, again, we've talked about this 100 million times, but, I was saying probably a week before I even got Pillars, Divinity is fantastic. It's an awesome, I was calling it a classic styled computer RPG. I would probably amend that now and say it's a little more modern. And that's what I like about it. And that's what made me sort of, again, gun shy about Pillars. And, like you, I played Wasteland, and I just was never really that interested in it. Like, I just wasn't having fun. It felt it had the sort of glitchy, held together by Scotch tape vibe of classic CRPGs. So it got that right. But, it just wasn't fun. It just felt old and like I had seen it all before. And, it just... I appreciated the mindset that went into making it, and certainly the passion and care that they spent developing that game. But it felt like something I had played before, just not quite as good. Mm-hmm. Whereas Divinity felt like something I had played before, but with all these great new ideas, their really cool physics system. But the main thing I would say to compare Divinity to Pillars is that Pillars is more traditional, yes, but also less of and Divinity is not an open world game, but less open than Divinity, because Divinity is very much you have a sort of goal, go. And, like you said, there's 5 ways you can leave the first town. 3 of them will get you slaughtered. One of them is sort of a good way, and the other one is very challenging. So it's very, it sort of starts challenging you right from the start. And there are a lot of systems in Divinity that really aren't explained, or they sort of rely on you figuring it out. And experimenting. Like, the biggest culprit is the crafting system. I love the game, and I sort of didn't figure out crafting until almost the end of the game in my first playthrough. That was like a 90-hour playthrough. It's a great crafting system, but again, it along with the combat system and the way you level up and a lot of the things that open up over the course of the game are more of a, explore and do cool stuff. And again, it has hard turn-based combat. Divinity, or Pillars, does not have hard turn-based combat for starters. It has real-time combat that you can pause, which is a throwback to the Infinity Engine games. And what's cool about that style of combat is that it's at your pace. It's sort of like the active battle system in Final Fantasy, or the active, when you put ATB on active mode, where, it's always going. Only it's like let me rephrase that. It's like the active system, but on wait, where when it's time to make a command, you have all the time you need to think. And you can set auto-pause conditions in combat. So it's like, if I encounter a strong enemy or if somebody gets poisoned, the game will automatically pause so you can assess the situation. I don't use that because it's sort of, I personally do not have trouble managing that moment to moment. But what's cool about that is that it sort of lets you pace the combat as you like. If you're wanting to make every little command, if you're doing something very particular, if you're trying to, take out the enemies in a certain order or get your party to walk in a certain formation, or, you want to have your paladin stand just a little bit off to the left while your mage throws a lance of fire at somebody and then step over. You have that kind of control. But you also have the option to either slow it down to a slow motion thing, which was not in classic Infinity Engine games, which is weird to me because at that point just pause. Or you can, you can play it in real time, which is weird. But on the other hand, for easier encounters, that allows you to just sort of, if you can get through the fight just by whacking everybody, then, you can do that. So that's those are sort of the differences between Divinity and Pillars. But again, one of the I would say the main difference is that Divinity has a lot of really cool cooperative role playing elements, but they are not, I would say, as realized as they are in Pillars of Eternity. Because in Pillars, for starters, your dialogue is of the Planescape Torment variety. I would say it's even more expansive than classic Baldur's Gate games because there's, any number of situations could have, you could have up to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At one point, I had 12 conversation options. And, sometimes they'll be locked off to you, and you can actually modify whether or not it shows you options you can't do. But it'll, sometimes it'll be based on your class. Like, oh, if you're a mage, yeah, of course I know about this wizardry stuff. So you get a different conversation option that could have a totally different conclusion to this quest. Or, if you have a lot of strength, you could threaten somebody. That's a classic one. Or if you have a lot of perception and someone is clearly lying to you and you have high perception, you could be like, hey, you said someone stole your goat and they broke in the window, but the window isn't broken. Mm-hmm. Perception lets you do that. Or, your background could affect it. Or what's most interesting is that your reputation. And this is not a Mass Effect.
Your reputation and there's like 12 dispositions or something.
Yeah, so what happens is you don't have these dispositions. You don't know what they are. But, for example, if every conversation you're a total D-bag to everybody, but you're still doing nice things, you'll get points in aggressive and in benevolent. So if you're like, oh, God, you're such a jackass, but I'm going to help you, you'll get known for being benevolent but also sort of a jerk. Mm-hmm. And people react to that. So, occasionally, and this happened a lot. This wasn't in Fallout 3, there are so many ways to end quests. We have this one where you can blow up a town or not blow it up, and that was sort of the only one. I mean, there were others, but none of them were that major. This is, pervasive. You will walk to a new city, and your reputation will precede you. Someone will run up to you and be like, look, I heard you're really nice and you do these things. Can you please help me? Mm-hmm. Or, if you're known, I'm starting a new file where my character's kind of a dick, and people will walk up and be like, hey, how's it going? I hope I'm not making you mad. And, so those little things that lend to immersion. But what's coolest about that is that there are a lot of sequences in the game, one in particular I have in mind, where if you cultivate a reputation for being honest, for example, because your dispositions will rank up as you do those things. So if you're perpetually honest, you will get higher and higher ranks in the honesty disposition. And at one point, there's actually, there's an event going on where you need to prove something. And because I had cultivated such a reputation for being a straight shooter in this town, I was able to say, look, you can ask anybody here. I'm totally, I'm always honest. I'm saying this is happening and my word should be proof alone. And you can actually fulfill that. So it's in that large amount of writing that I think Divinity sets it apart from these games, in that I'm playing Divinity. I'm enjoying the combat. The class system is great, and we could talk about that.
I love the class system in this game.
It's very, you are clearly a mage, but you have a lot of flexibility in your mage. And I actually didn't make a mage. You'd be proud of me.
What?
I know, right?
Oh, great.
But
Hell froze over. Fantastic.
The thing about Divinity, the Pillars, that made me literally start a new playthrough the day after I beat it, and I don't do that. I just don't do that. Was that every single interaction you have is so interesting and so colored by how you're role-playing that I would say it's the truest representation of tabletop role-playing I've ever played in a game. It's just all of those little things coalesce to create this experience that is very much I am playing a character in a role in a really well-realized world. I'm not just, an avatar collecting weapons and beating up enemies and then going through 3 dialogue options. This is not BioWare hey, let me help you. Okay, bye. I want to be a dragon.
Well, I think the role-playing portion of most of the Western RPGs have fallen into we're giving you dialogue choices, but the dialogue choices are always to quote Yahtzee in one of his reviews, tell me more about the people of Megaton. Tell me more about the raiders that are in the area. That's the role-playing. You're not really making decisions. The game
there's a little bit of that, but
sure.
But there is expository dialogue like that, but when you sort of get to a break point in the dialogue that might affect how a character or a town thinks of you, they will look at all of your reputations and disposition rankings and what kind of class you are and everything and your stats, and then you can get 10 to 15 plus dialogue options at the end of the rabbit hole. And
Yeah, and
it's
there's
staggering. There's a lot of reading in this game.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you don't like reading, just don't play this game. Flat out, this is not a. I like to play the action mode in Mass Effect, so I picked the action mode where all the dialogue is chosen for me. Don't do that. I would say I had 93 hours in my first playthrough. I would say a solid 45 of it was spent reading. And it's not like Metal Gear where you're reading forever and ever and ever. It's just the game is delivered to you through text, and it's really well written. Your character can read souls, so there are people you can meet where you can like reach out to their soul and get a cool little short story from their past, very Lost Odyssey style. And it plays into the main narrative a lot too. Like someone will be like, I'm totally not secretly keeping someone in my basement. And then you'll like reach out to them and see when they kidnap the person. And you can play it cool, or you can be like, huh, that's funny, because I remember when you were at the tavern and kidnapped this person. And they're like, how'd you know that? So it's oddly power fantasy in that your character, like if you play cleverly, you have all these interesting scenarios open to you. And so like, and there's nuance to it, like my original character was my usual, I'm incredibly nice, I don't take rewards, I always help everybody, and I do the right thing, and I don't get angry. I'm playing another character now. I made 2 custom characters. It's a monk and a rogue. And I'm playing them sort of as a duo that they will begrudgingly help people, but are like constantly trying to stay not involved with local, crap. And it's amazing how different the game is. Like the way people approach me is so different. If they approach me at all, certain groups are like that. There was one group in my original playthrough that because I crossed them, they're basically a crime syndicate. They started trying to assassinate me in town every time I'm walking around. But they would always, like, the people would show up and say something that would be like, I'm actually not working for this group. You stole money from me. And then you kill them and you find the note that clearly says that they were. Whereas now that group, because I have not cultivated a reputation as a do-gooder, even though I am doing good things, I'm not known for it. They're like, hey, would you be willing to help us out? Mm-hmm. So it's very subtle the way it changes, but it's just the writing is so good that it makes me just want to keep playing it and keep exploring, because their world and their lore is great. And this is not like, again, I love Dragon Age Inquisition, although in retrospect, this game makes me like it a little less, because this is not, hey, we dumped 400,000 lore books on the ground, there's our lore. Because there is some of that in this game. There's a lot of that because there's a lot of writing everywhere. But this is a game where their lore is informing the story. This isn't, we have 3,000 years of history to the Angelus Council. Also, Malthael's a dick. Go kill him. This is very much we created a world and then we wrote a story that hinges upon that fiction.
The one crazy thing about this game to me, I mean, I barely played computer RPGs, but I gave to this Kickstarter anyway because everyone else was, which is a terrible reason to spend money on anything, but whatever. I don't make good decisions all the time. Yeah, it worked out this time. So I'd never played more than an hour of an Infinity Engine game because I was always overwhelmed by the stuff you can do, and I always seem to die right away. I just didn't really get it. And playing this game at probably a lower difficulty than Steven's playing it was really eye-opening and fascinating, and it's a totally new kind of game experience to me. And the way I role-played was really informed by my choice of class, because I decided to make my main character a paladin, and the paladin's natural ability is this barrier that increases a bunch of his resistances. And when you create your paladin, you choose the organization he or she belongs to, or sort of, and along with that organization, there's sort of a creed. And so if you're a do-gooding paladin, then based on your creed, that your shield improves if you pick more benevolent and kind options, and the shield weakens if you pick more cruel or aggressive options. And so there's 5 or 6 of those orders of paladins that you can choose that will inform the dispositions that you should choose for bonuses, and avoid ones that may not give you bonuses. So the ones that I picked are the ones that give you the order that gives you a disposition bonus if you're stoic or honest. So my paladin is basically what's his name, Stannis Baratheon.
What you're saying is that you're a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
Yeah, he is super boring, but does everything by the book, and is more inclined to just not say anything than say something nice or mean.
And you can do that. There are a lot of dialogue sequences where your option is say nothing, and that will affect things.
See, what's what's actually got me the most intrigued about this game, and I think it's where like my break with Divinity happened very fast because I didn't enjoy the combat. Like again, I get it's deep, but it didn't do it for me. You guys have spent all this time talking about the role playing of the game, which if we go back to one of my favorite games ever, and everybody take a shot because I'm going to mention Vampire. I love Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines because I get to role play my vampire. That game is not actually very fun to play from a gameplay perspective. Like
No.
it's kind of crappy, but like the
which is totally par for the course for a lot of those classic games.
right, but like the role playing aspect of that game is fantastic. Like you find like some information on somebody and you kind of hold it over their head and the game rewards you for doing that sort of thing. I'm not saying that Pillars doesn't have great combat, like I'm sure you guys are going to touch on that here in a second, but this is you guys are spending more time talking about the role playing of the game, which I think is one of the main things that I love about Western RPGs. As opposed, like I love a good story in my JRPG. Don't get me wrong. Like I love, Rhine time, and I'm gonna get the shirt that has the clock with Rhine's face all over it.
It's Rhine time.
I love that stuff, but I love role playing. That was my favorite part of tabletop gaming with my buddies. I love the role playing aspect. I wasn't such a big fan of the combat. And this game sounds like it's giving, just like Steven was saying, that tabletop experience.
So I will quote my review. My first pro is fantastic role playing and combat. So the combat is on its surface, and at some deeper levels, very similar to classic Infinity Engine games. Like I said, auto pausing, pause real time. You control your party of 6, and first of all, there's a lot of meta strategy in what is your party. Because it's definitely a party-based game. There's an achievement for beating the game solo, and it could conceivably be done, but why would you do that? Because you get all these... That's the thing, that's another reason I started a new game, is I had so much fun experimenting with my classes that I wanted to try the other ones. I never want to try other classes, but I was like, oh gosh, it's so cool seeing how these different ways they interact, and even the way you spec them makes them different.
And the classes are so unique. It is absolutely not just a matter of different skills and different stats. Like there's different mechanics surrounding each class that has you approach each one totally differently.
So for example, even we'll go with the most boring class of all, fighter. You could be a fighter that fights with a great sword and your main skill is just dishing out tons of damage. You could be a fighter who is very, very defensive. You could be where you have a lot of moves that protect the rest of the party. And again, you're not a paladin, you're a fighter. You could have moves that because you can use any weapon with that class, and through traits you can choose what they're skilled with. My fighter, who I'm calling Troy Baker, even though it's actually Matt Mercer, which sucks, but he sounds like Troy Baker.
Matt Mercer plays Troy Baker in some of the Persona 4 materials.
Exactly, and so Troy Baker in my party was a sword and shield wielding guy. He used a saber, which is different from a regular sword because it has a different degree of armor piercing. And I gave him a lot of knockdown type attacks because I had a paladin who would follow up and do a lot of damage, and then the rest of my party focused on damage. So my main paladin, because there's a mechanic called engagement, and this is so that way you don't have 3 giant ogres that are fighting your fighter and then they decide to go after your mage. Engagement, what it does is depending on, because every class has a number of engagement. For example, your fighter starts with 3. That means 3 enemies are engaged with him, and if they try to leave, he attacks them and they stop, and their exit is stopped, so they stay engaged with him. And so I leveled my guy up to have really high engagement and a lot of knockdown. So basically my fighter's job was to just keep the enemy from getting anywhere while the rest of my party just railed on them. That's just him in particular. But then, for example, my protagonist, I made a chanter, who is basically, to explain what my character was, he was a shotgun-wielding man who could sing, summon dragons, and shoot fire and lightning while he shot people with shotguns.
Please explain how chanting works specifically with the phrases and everything, because this is one thing that blew my mind a little bit when I was researching the different classes.
So what's cool, but what a chanter is they are essentially singing magical verse, and you as you level up, you earn different verses. Like you could get, and you have a staff sheet, like a musical staff. And so say I have 3 chants. I have one that raises my party's attack power. I have one that causes the enemies to light on fire if they get near my hero, and I have one that causes my party to leave ice where they walk. So you put those in, depending on the power, each verse takes a different amount of time to chant. And so you can set your chant, and your character will start singing at the beginning of the fight, and every time you finish a verse, you get a charge. And then with a certain number of charges, your character, you have another set of spells called incantations, which are basically really powerful magic spells that are powered by your verses. So my character, for example, in a fight, I would start him off. He would stand in the back and shoot his shotguns, and chant to buff my party, because I had a chant where he buffed the party a lot, and then I had another more specific chant that I used where it was a lot of like enemy, debuffs towards the enemy and like things that are a little more technical. And I had, one of them had a lot of shorter verses, so I could build up power faster, because those spells are things like summon a dragon, and not like a baby dragon, but like a full like drake, like awesome kill stuff dragon. I had one that made me instantly charm a bunch of enemies, and it works all the time. And so like if I got into a fight, if I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a short fight, I would use my longer chants that power up my party so I can kill faster. Versus if I'm in a boss battle, I would use my faster chants so I could quickly get up to my powerful magic and, say, charm a group of the enemies or summon a dragon to back me up. And, again, you have to make choices because you cannot learn all of the spells. So, like, my guy was very much focused on, like, a sort of support/damage role. But there are, like, revive skills you get, and reviving is very scarce in this game. Only at maybe the last 20 hours of my experience did I have any way to revive people during combat. So that's one class. That's the Chanter. That's just one of my classes.
Yeah, there's 11 classes in the game. The Chanter is one of the more elaborate, complicated ones, and say the Fighter or the Paladin that I had as my character are two of the less complicated ones. But each one sort of wears its gimmick extremely well and feels totally different from controlling any other class. And it blew me away. I thought it was one of the coolest class systems I had experienced in years.
There's one cool class called the Cypher.
That's the basically, one I want to try. Yeah.
So yeah. I had a Cypher. There's because you can either hire generic party members who work like the ones in Final Fantasy Tactics where there's no story to them, or you can get the companions who are more like a BioWare companion. In my first playthrough, I used all, because you create them earlier, and then your stronghold, you have different objectives that your stronghold can do. So I had made generic characters that I just sent off on stronghold missions while I kept my actual scripted party members with me. And there's one that's a Cypher. And the Cypher, basically, what they do is they're a melee class. And the way I played it, I had my character wear very light armor and use a dagger so she could attack really fast, because they have an ability called Soul Whip. And every time they use their Soul Whip attack, which is any regular attack, it builds up focus, or not focus, I think it's called focus, but it's a little meter that builds in the corner of your character portrait, and that powers their magic. And their magic is like wreck people's face type of magic.
Yeah, it's very aggressive, direct, like mostly a lot of it's short range. But yeah, I'm using the Cypher that they give you as over the course of the story, and she's maybe my favorite character to mess around with.
Yeah, well, this all sounds very fun.
No, it's great. And that's the thing is, you could play your Cypher as a heavier warrior type with heavy armor, the slower recovery, slower action speed. But the way I played the Cypher was like super aggressive, where I had her like stabbing people super fast to build up focus. Because they get spells like, one splinters the enemy's soul and damages enemies with the energy released. There's just so many different kinds of ways to fight. And the composition of your party will absolutely inform that. Because, you can change your formation. The beginning of the game is much harder. I played on normal for the review, and it still took 93 hours.
Wait. You didn't play a magic user.
Wait.
You played on normal.
Right? I assumed you would play. I'm playing on normal as well, but I assumed you would do a higher difficulty than me because you're Steven.
My new playthrough, I'm on hard mode, and that's another cool thing you'd like, Rob. Hard mode does not make any enemy stats higher; it just changes what enemies appear in the encounters.
I like that,
and it's
that
awesome
I like
because I know how to. Because the reason it's cool, I know how to play the game better. Because the last difficulty, Path of the Damned, actually raises the stats as well. But what's cool about hard mode is I've played the game, I know how to play, I'm quite good, but I'm still like. Now what I'm doing is, instead of just being like, oh, I'm getting killed because the enemy just one-shots me, now it's like, oh, there are 5 more of these enemies, or, oh, there's a spellcaster in the back who's now, punching through all my defenses. So now, as a player who has played the game before, I'm being challenged with a different kind of encounter as opposed to just enemies are ganking you.
I felt like when I pumped the difficulty up on Dragon Age Inquisition, like I started a new character just to mess around with that for a little bit, and I played that entire game on hard, I want to say, and I died like once or twice, and then there were the dragons, which I don't feel like talking about right now. But then there's like
there are dragons in pillars.
I know, but then there was the nightmare mode that I played, and I started the game from nightmare mode, and all it was that enemies were just hitting me super hard, and I was like, there's nothing for me to do here. Like, All it is the enemies are just hitting me harder. And I find that to be the lamest way to increase difficulty in a game.
I understand why it's done because it's easy and can be, it's faster. And again, Path of the Damned changes the encounters, but also makes the stats harder. So you have that option. But that's the thing, is that this is a challenging game. I will say I did every single side quest I could possibly do in my playthrough. And the game has 4 acts, and the 4th act is significantly shorter than the rest.
Mm-hmm.
I did all of the side
just barely
quests.
started the second act. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. So I did all of the side quests that I possibly could. I did all of the hunts, which are if you upgrade your stronghold to have basically a hunting lodge, you'll get marks to go hunt in the world. I did all of those, and those give quite a bit of XP. I maxed out at the max level of 12, which is not as low as you might think, because you get a lot of options at each level. I was at the max level at the beginning of Act 3. And that didn't even take away from the fun of the game, although it did make it easier because I was sort of dump trucking a lot of the fights. But again, that's, in my playthrough, that was probably 70 hours out of my 93 where I was leveling. And then so the last ones were easier, with the exception of the bonus dungeon, which is quite difficult. And that's why I gained so many levels, because I cleared the bonus dungeon very early. The dragon battles are quite challenging, and they're fun. And in many cases, you don't even have to fight them. You can actually solve a lot of the issues with the dragons through dialogue if you choose to do that. You won't get the achievement for killing all the dragons, though. And then the boss of the bonus dungeon is leaps and bounds significantly, as in I was getting frustrated on normal mode harder than everything else in the game. There's a way you can cheese the fight through a side quest that I opted not to do because I wanted to make it as hard as possible. And I did eventually win, but it's a really hard fight. But for the most part, the game has a good difficulty curve unless you over-level, in which case it gets a little easy.
Cool. I mean, I think you've done your job, Steven. I want to pick this up. I've got a lot of small games on my docket right now. Like, I started playing Westerado, which is a great top-down kind of Western Zelda-style adventure game, and I'm really liking that. Axiom Verge, I think I'm done with. I want to like that game more than I do. And I think there's one other one that's on my list, and then Pillars of Eternity's right there. But I got to admit,
for a fellow like you who has the summer not teaching classes, are you teaching this summer?
I'll do a little bit of teaching this summer, but I have a lot of free time.
It's a good summer game.
Yeah.
It's a long game, and it's not a game you're going to want to rush. You're going to want to sit down and just relax and play it for a while. And like I said, the beginning of the game is challenging, but it also eases you into things a lot better than A, the classic Baldur's Gate titles, and B, Divinity. Because Divinity has very little in the way of, like, I'm going to teach you how to play. Yeah. Pillars does not have such a thing.
Well, Divinity is about the experimentation, which is great, but I felt so hindered at the start of that game. It was like, nah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that another thing this game has that I love is that every single stat or keyword in the game, like, hey, perception, or damage reduction or deflection, every single one of those, if you click on it, you get a tooltip that says how this stat is calculated and where the calculations are coming from, whether it's your character or your gear or your traits.
That's very helpful, because there's, I think, 6 or 7 or 8 types of damage, and each one of them responds to one or more types of defense, and sort of damage reductions connected to all of them. So it was a little bit overwhelming for me at first, who was not used to playing these kind of games, but I could pause and just like mess around in menus for a while, and they were able to explain everything. I mean, those older Baldur's Gate was one of the older Infinity Engine games I tried to play. It was just so impregnable and barely explained itself ever, and that was part of why I was really struggling to play it 10 years ago or however long ago.
Yeah, and I told you this, Mike, but I also recommend when you play this game, get a party as fast as you can. The way the path I took through the early story, because it's very non-linear insofar as that you know what your objectives are, but it's like a BioWare game where you can sort of accomplish them in any order. I went to the hardest possible quest in Act 1 first, and I did it, but only after leaving and hiring adventurers, because once you hit a certain point, they're sort of expecting that you have a 6-person party so you can manage these encounters. So the suggestion I make to most people, Solosi, you went the right way. You actually found the scripted companions faster than I did.
Yeah, well, I didn't, I guess, explore as thoroughly as you did, but I, just by going to the first town and the area just outside the first town, I got 3 party members right away. And then in the very next area, there was a 4th one. So I had, after hiring 1 archer character, or I guess ranger, I had a party of 6 before hitting the first sort of major encounter area.
Yeah, and that's a good route to take because you'll get interesting story more often, and they pace the companion story throughout the whole game, so you're gonna feel like you're like at first you're gonna be like they don't have a whole lot to say, but it's because they actually react to the adventure and like they don't just reveal everything to you because you went and did a mission and then you clicked all their dialogue options.
And also, this is just going into the different types of characters and companions you meet. My 2 favorite characters that I've met so far, I don't think I have all of them yet.
I'm guessing one of them is Durance.
Durance, yes, it's Durance and the Cipher. What's her name? Wailing Mother. Grieving Mother. Yeah, Grieving Mother and Durance are my 2 favorites. And one thing I just love about Durance is that he's a priest, but he is not a white tunicked, super holy, traditional Western priest character. He is like a dirty, weirdo, zealot philosopher.
Sort of pervy, foul-mouthed. Like, this is how interesting the characters get. He's one of the most interesting in terms of narrative.
Yeah.
This character is angry at his god, and in order to shove it to her, he's following her teachings so closely that she can't possibly get angry at him.
Yeah, I think if you roll a priest character, you choose which god to worship, and that affects your abilities and stats and whatnot. And he is taking that to a really amusing extreme and has a really cool personality. So he's one of the characters I use the most. Him and I'm just terrible with names and faces. Him and the chanter that you get. I just met Grieving Mother. Yeah. The crazy ocean ogre chanter that
Kana, he's hilarious. He's like
he's great.
He's like this huge imposing guy who's sort of a goofy scholar.
And his race is a race unique to Pillars among this kind of fiction. It's like a sort of an islander ogre whose culture resembles, like Samoa or Maori or something. But they're these big trolly or ogre-looking things, and Kana is really goofy and funny, and he's a useful chanter.
Yeah, I didn't use him too much because I had one, but because I was a chanter. But I completed his side quest and used him in the bonus dungeon. So yeah, could go on quite a while. I gave this game a ridiculously high score. I think it deserved it. There is going to have to be some serious competition for me to not give it Game of the Year. I love Bloodborne, but it's I am still probably going to give it to Pillars.
No, that's great. I think that's awesome. I'm really excited that we have 3 big games in the span of 2.5 months that I think are going to come up in Game of the Year competition.
Big in every sense of the word.
Like Bloodborne, Pillars of Eternity, and then Witcher 3, the more I see of that game, the more I think that game looks really hot. Like that's 3 amazing RPGs, I think maybe for our listeners that are, really big into the JRPGs, those games are coming. We're going to lose our minds when Persona 5 comes out and when Xenoblade gets here to America. We're going to lose our minds.
Bravely Second just came out in Japan.
Yeah, we're not going to lose our minds over that. Whatever. Sorry. I'm having
it's okay.
fun.
Not all of us can have the right opinion.
Yeah, you don't like Bloodborne, so there
you don't like Bravely. Bravely blank.
I think the second I heard how much backtracking there was in Bravely, I was like, I'm done.
You don't have to do any of that though.
Okay. We don't. I mean, this is a new game. Don't get me wrong.
It's not perfect, but again, this is a new game, and B, Bravely Default was awesome. It was. The argument is that it is too long.
It's a reasonable argument that we don't need to revisit here, but there's a lot of exciting RPGs coming out this year, no matter what your tastes and preferences are, and that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, and I think I need to pick up Pillars, and we're about ready to take the AP exams, and then I am stick a fork in me done for the school year, and I can get ready for E3, and I think Pillars is going to be my game. I'm trying to think, what was the other game I need to play? I think I need to play the Outlast DLC, but that's just like...
You need to play Ori and the Blind Forest so you can get that taste of Axiom Verge out of your mouth with a perfect platforming game.
It's not that Axiom Verge is a bad game, it's just that it is a 9 that because of some really... I want to be really respectful for the dude because it was one guy making it, and I think that's amazing. And I really like the exploration aspects of that game. But there's some parts that I'm just like, I think if one person had looked over his shoulder, they would have gone, maybe you should show where the doors are on the map because it's going to be an absolute nightmare if you somehow miss the door and you have to backtrack all over Hell's Half Acre to see where you're going. Like that's one of those things that Super Metroid got right, and we're kind of missing it here. But anywho,
You mean all?
Bob,
Super Metroid got everything right.
weren't you the one who was arguing that Metroid Prime is better than Super Metroid, and I wanted to slap you?
Well, I've beaten Metroid Prime. I haven't beaten Super Metroid. So if I was making that argument, I was being a little.
I think you were being ornery with me one night, and I think it was on a podcast too, where you were just
No,
like,
don't get me wrong. I'm gonna beat Super Metroid someday, and I love that game. But Metroid Prime is amazing.
I think Metroid Prime is an amazing beginning, and then it kind of gets a little muddled at the end. I don't like the backtracking, and I really don't like the final boss. I really don't like that final boss.
Re-backtracking. Super Metroid has just as much as Metroid Prime.
Not in the end game. Not in the end game. You beat the 4 bosses and you go to the main area. Like it does not have the you need to go find 4 keys in the world. Have fun. Like that's and then there was Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, which was like, are you serious? Like that.
I think Metroid. I think story. I still sort of like that game though.
I didn't like Echoes hardly at all. I think the luster had kind of worn off, and they pushed that game design to their limit. But
that doesn't stop everyone from clamoring for Retro Studios to make another Metroid Prime, even though I thought their Donkey Kong games were way better than Metroid Prime 2 or 3.
I really want them to make a 2D Metroid, but, I'm just going to sit here with that candle like the last Monumental and Demon's Souls, just holding on to that hope for dear life.
They've made Metroid games, and they've made 2D games, so it's not totally unreasonable to think that. But,
don't worry, Rob.
What the hell is Retro Studios even doing now?
Well, they keep teasing that Mega Man game that they were making that looked absolutely nuts, and I was kind of like, sure, what the hell.
Well, I think when they say keep teasing, you mean they announced that one time when it was canceled?
Yeah, but they also
showed Retro Studios.
Yes, it was.
It was Retro Studios.
Yeah, it was Maverick Hunter X. Yep.
Maverick Hunter X for the PSP?
No, we're talking about a canceled game.
Yeah,
it was not called Maverick Hunter X though.
Yeah, Maverick Hunter X is the PSP remake of Mega Man X1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry, Rob. At E3 when they announce a new Metroid, we can talk about it.
I will be very excited. I will be the first one to yip and holler. So.
When they announce 2 new Metroids, a handheld one and a console one.
I think you're dreaming, but I really want you to be right. How about that? Does that make sense? Like, I think you're wrong, but I want you to be right.
That's how everyone else pretty much says it.
Yep. All right, let's talk about some news. I want to talk about a burning car crash.
You mean...
We have 2. Let's start with actual, because it kind of relates to RPGs, then we can sort of start... we can sort of start on something else that's kind of tangentially related. So Valve decided to try something a little different, and they allowed people to charge for mod support, or to charge for mods on some games on Steam, and that kind of blew up. You had, of course, Skyrim, one of the most heavily modded games on Steam, including things like Sky UI, which makes that game absolutely incredible from an inventory management standpoint. And suddenly people started charging for those mods, including Sky UI and things that I had been playing and using that were free. You could suddenly pay money for. I'm of a couple minds of this. On the one hand, I kind of stand with Jim Sterling on this. I think he did a really good piece on Monday about this. On the one hand, I think content creators like Durante, the guy who fixed Dark Souls on PC and Deadly Premonition, because those were 2 rotten-ass ports on PC, and he got in there and fixed them up better than a game company, which is amazing. If you want to donate to that guy, if he wants, a PayPal or whatever that you can donate money to and say, hey, this was an awesome job, dude, thanks, that's completely fine. I think that's great. When you start charging for people's work that is not actually licensed by the game developer, and then you start getting into the nasty area of mods building on mods, like, are you going to charge me for the duct tape mod in Doom 3? Like, that stuff gets...
They did eventually.
Well, I mean, with the BFG edition, sure, but that was like the game developers trying to do something, and that failed miserably. That game sold like crap. But like, I, I don't know. Like, I was so like, I think this is a brave new world that Valve was entering, and they actually said the most honest thing I've ever seen out of a developer when after not even a week. I had students coming up to me asking me about this. Not even a week into this whole program, Valve took it away, so you no longer pay for mods, and they actually put out a letter saying it's very clear that we don't know what we're doing. And I was like, wow, that's completely honest.
Well, they have that reputation because there's plenty of people who backlash against Valve, and for good reason or not good reason, whatever. But part of the reason I like what they do is they're sort of very earnest about it. So they've done some dumb stuff, and they still have existing dumb decisions that have not been redacted. But I'm glad to see that they were able to do it in this one, because they do sort of have that reputation to maintain of a company that is doing things a little differently than how most companies do.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of how they advertise games to Steam people now. Steam people to users.
Oh no, I don't like it at all.
I made the mistake of clicking on an anime-looking game that turned out to be a hentai game, and all of a sudden,
Oh,
like,
good.
for 3 days straight, I ended up getting nothing but like, "Hey, do you want to check out this underage girl simulator?" And I'm like, "Oh, for God's sake, can we go back to you guys just like trying to get me to buy Vampire the Masquerade for like a fourth time? Like, can we go back to that?" I think that's I think
Sure.
that stuff's kind of terrible. But, this seems like they tried a Brave New World thing, and maybe it'll be the future down the line. But I think we got a lot of stuff to work out first when it comes to, how much work can a modder do, and modders working together, or people taking other people's mods and trying different things. I don't know. It seems like a Brave New World, but I think Valve did the right thing in the end by saying we very clearly didn't know what we were doing, and they're offering refunds.
That's good on them, but I mean, in a way, I sort of don't blame them, like you sort of alluded to towards the end there, because monetizing mods so that mod makers get a little bit of scratch from people downloading them, and Valve taking a cut off of that makes sense. Like that is a marketplace that they would like to be involved in at least a little bit, especially since mod tools are better than ever and these communities are still thriving. But they sort of took too big a step at first, and they ended up, stepping in a pile of crap that they immediately, stepped off of and washed off.
Yep.
So, yeah, it'll get there's going to be a model like that in the future, of course, but it'll be better than this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Speaking of stepping in a giant pile of crap, the fallout from not actual fallout, but the fallout from
Which
the
will
whole
probably be announced at E3.
most likely the fallout from the Kojima Productions hullabaloo over at Konami just continues to shock me to no end. Like,
I don't even know that this is fallout from that. I mean, maybe they're not unrelated.
true,
But I feel like
true.
whatever happened with Kojima is separate from this. I mean, it's obviously related to it, but Silent Hills was sadly canceled a day after PT was pulled off of the PlayStation Store, or
Yeah, so
announced to be being pulled
this
off.
whole thing started when PT, the playable teaser for Silent Hills, was announced to be coming off of the PlayStation Store, and that set the alarm bells and red flags and everybody losing their minds. And then Guillermo del Toro over the weekend said that Silent Hills wasn't going to happen anymore. That's the second time this dude has had a game with his name attached canceled. Y'all remember Insane? Y'all
I do
remember
remember
that?
the trailer for that looked cool.
Yeah, I was like, hey, cool. It kind of looks a little interesting here. That got canceled.
Yeah, he also had one of his Mountains of Madness film project canceled after like a studio backed away because Prometheus was too similar, which makes me really sad. Because
Yeah,
Prometheus wasn't great.
no, that's
But
not a very
Right, this was not great.
but yeah, so poor Guillermo del Toro has had terrible luck with his projects the past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And I think, what we're seeing here is, and we talked about it in the pre-show warm-up, Konami is not only a video game maker. Like, they have health clubs and stuff in Japan and pachinko machines. Like, they are not they're not a company that exists solely around video games. So it sounds like this is a massive restructuring. There's talk about them going for more mobile development. But I'm going to speak, very honestly and almost emotionally here. I'm furious and I'm pissed. Like, this is Konami holds such a special place in my heart as a gamer from the late 80s to the present day. You got your Metal Gear, you got your Castlevania, you got your Suikoden, you got your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for God's sake. Like, these guys made my childhood. And frankly, we all knew that there were major problems when they only had 3 apparent titles in production: Metal Gear 5, Metal Gear Solid 5, Pro Evolution Soccer, whatever year we're on, and Silent Hills, which was kind of more concept than game at that point. Uh, it was very clear that this is a company that maybe got scared because they took some risks. I mean, I think it was a valiant attempt what they decided to do with Castlevania on consoles. Didn't really work out. That kind of came back to bite them a little bit. They spent a lot of money on Lords of Shadow 2, and that game didn't end up so well and probably didn't sell that well. It went on sale very quickly. They've gotten a little snake bit, and it sounds like they're moving away from publishing big video games. And
That's the second time today you've said snake bit, by the way.
Sorry.
It's okay. I was just counting.
No, you're right. You're right. I was talking about it earlier. And this just makes me really sad. Like, I hate seeing a game developer go through this. I think some people misread me over the past couple years when I talk about Square Enix. I don't like talking about a burning car wreck. I really don't. I don't like pointing at the car accident and saying, bah, ha, 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 that's terrible. No, I want Square Enix to kick ass. I want Konami to kick ass. I want Capcom to kick ass. And Square Enix is certainly coming around quite a bit. Final Fantasy 14, Final Fantasy 15, Bravely Default. Like, they are coming around. They're figuring out.
New Deus Ex, yay!
Yeah, like they're doing some cool stuff with both Western titles and their own like in-house brand. For the love of God, bring Dragon Quest VII to the States on 3DS, please. Please, for the love of God, do that. So Steven is not waving that copy of Dragon Warrior 7 in my face, and I want to punch him. But
I've been avoiding playing my copy of that in hopes of being able to play it on 3DS, but yeah, it's not happening.
But then you've got Capcom, which can't really see. I mean, Capcom single-handedly resurrected the 2D fighting game and then drove it into the dirt within 5 years. Like, and they can't get it right. Resident Evil.
Well, I mean, I don't really like horror games, but I played a lot of Street Fighter 4, and they've actually been pretty reasonable with the updates on that. Well, okay, I don't know how much I don't know if this is a hill worth dying on, but I thought that the first update to Street Fighter 4 was justified, and the others after it probably not. Probably the paid ones weren't, but I really do miss Breath of Fire, and I wish that the new one wasn't a mobile game.
Yep,
a mobile game that looks nothing like Breath of Fire.
Yep.
And I mean, speaking of fires, this slow burning tire fire that is whatever Konami's doing. If there ever is a new Suikoden or Castlevania that I want to play, I mean, I'm worried it's going to be on a phone. And as much as I've been playing more phone games the past 12 months than I ever have in my entire life, but I don't want to play like a series that I loved on consoles on a phone. I want a big cool console version.
Well, and I think that there's room for maybe not a AAA $100 million project. I mean, there's room for these smaller games. Like, I'm looking at Steam right now, like Westerado, Pillars of Eternity. You have all these games which were much more reasonable. They're able to make a lot of money because they didn't cost nearly as much. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 5 cost probably an insane amount of money to make. That game has to sell a lot of copies before it turns a profit. Maybe that's not the direction for every one of their titles, but they can do smaller stuff. Like, there are avenues available to them. The PlayStation Network, Xbox One, they all have huge download services. There's nothing wrong. Like, if Capcom just threw together a nasty-ass Mega Man 2D game, people would lap it up. People lapped up Mega Man 9. Like, come on, guys. You know what you're doing here. But it seems like the mobile space is so strong, especially in Japan, and they're seeing such massive profits that they almost can't turn their back on it. But this angers me. Like, I'm just like, I'm not trying to be the old man on Fox News, like, back in my day, but, like, I want to see these types of titles. I want to see these companies willing to take risks. Like I want to see those kinds of things. And we're just Square Enix has gotten it together, and I thought Square Enix was dead and gone. Really, I did. And they have somehow managed to fix it by listening to fans and putting some goddamn effort into it. And meanwhile, we're not seeing that so much out of Capcom and Konami. The big three. Eesh.
I disagree with that perception of yours a lot, and I think I threw shade at you on the forums a year or two ago because of that. But yeah, I think it's just the pricing model of games nowadays. I say pricing model, I should say the budget structure, I guess, because it seems like to have a successful game, it either needs to cost them $100 million and make 200 million, or be a cell phone game with microtransactions. And there's a lot less space in the middle, or away from those extremes. So a game that might have had a medium budget and catered to a more niche audience, like a Mega Man game or a Suikoden game, is not as economically feasible anymore because of the way that they're targeting these sort of two extremes of the pay scale. And that's depressing. I mean, this is weird to say, but I think that Ubisoft is actually doing a really, really smart thing by, I think I might have mentioned this before on a podcast, but they're having these big budget games that sort of make the bread for them, and then these weirder, smaller budget games like Child of Light that just to mess around with something low budget and maybe build some goodwill among among the gaming press and gaming fan base at large. And balancing those big budget things with medium and small budget things seems like the perfect way to go about doing things to me. But Konami's abandoning all that. They're not going to make a sort of lo-fi download only Castlevania for PS4 and Wii U and Xbone. They're going to abandon medium or large budget games entirely, and that's sad. And even though I'm not a Silent Hill guy, it like PT was one of the legit coolest things that happened in video games last year. And now they're taking all this momentum and hype and clout they had built with that and just throwing it away. It's like, nah, it's not worth it. And that's sad, even if you're not even to me, who isn't into Silent Hill at all.
Yeah, I think that I talked about it over the past year. I think you take a title like Alien Isolation and you chop that game in half, which is what it really needed. It didn't need to be as long as it was, and it actually lost momentum. Chop that game in half and sell it for $25 or $30, and I think you would have had a way more profitable game. Honestly, like, it ended up doing well for him, but I think you would have had more interest, and people are willing to try things at lower budgets, and we're seeing that with the download services. Why not try it a little bit?
Yeah, the indie market is thriving with these download services, and Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft are all reaching out to indie developers and trying to get these games on their consoles. I don't know why more big game companies do something sort of like what Ubisoft is doing and try to make some games with that budget and that target audience in-house.
Yeah, your Ubisoft argument is actually really strong. I didn't know where you were going there, but when you brought up Child of
Light, I mean, I'm not an Assassin's Creed guy at all, but the way that they're sort of planning these different budget levels of games, it seems really smart to me.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of room for that. And if Konami had announced a PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Wii U 2D Castlevania game, good lord, people would have lost their damn minds.
If it's like Harmony of Despair, but actually sort of a standalone, self-contained Castlevania game that you can download, then I couldn't draw out my credit card fast enough.
Yeah, people would be willing to try it. And I also think gamers are way more willing to part with $20 than $60. $60 is a major purchase. $20 is, getting a pizza and a couple of 2 liters. I'm not saying that money should be wasted, but it's much easier to throw $20 at something. Like I'll buy a $15 game off Steam, play it a couple times and go, it's not really my jam, but that was cool. I have no problem throwing $15 at Axiom Verge. It turned out to not be my thing, but fine. What the hell? I got like 4 hours out of it.
the flip side of this is that people have grown so comfortable in these digital markets that have sales all the time that for
Yep.
some people 15 or 20 bucks is too much, which seems a little crazy to me, but I also have disposable income and some of that disposable income goes to games every year, naturally, but it's weird. They're still figuring out how much video games should cost and how much people are willing to buy for what kind of game. Those questions don't have hard answers now, even though we've had online marketplaces for over a decade. It's a fascinating conversation, but I don't know how much farther we should go. I mean,
Yeah.
we could be doing this all night.
Yeah. I'm just sad. I'm really, really sad, and I hope that, it sounds like Konami might be done in this space. I'm really hoping that some of the success that Capcom has seen over the past couple months. I mean, they just announced that Resident Evil HD version sold 1 million copies, which is probably more than it sold on GameCube. That's fantastic. So,
And Lords of Shadow is the best-selling Castlevania game of all time.
is it really?
Yeah, that's why they made a sequel. I don't know if Lords of Shadow 2 did better than it, but that's sort of what pushed Konami towards making only blockbusters or cell phone games.
Huh.
It's a little sad seeing. I mean, Simon Belmont is one of the top 5 or 6 reasons why I kept playing my NES, and it's to see Konami screw up this bad. I hope that the series from it that I love gets salvaged somehow, even if it's not by Konami.
Yeah. Well, Norman Reedus is sad. He will not be in Silent Hills. Very depressing.
I'm sad he won't be in Silent Hill as well.
My only thing is that I would have been really pissed off if we just got another Silent Hill game with an unreliable narrator protagonist that had a dark past. If we got another one of those, then I would have been pissed.
I don't think you would have been pissed if it was good.
No, I'm a little tired of the Silent Hill 2 story done over and over again. I'm kind of through with it. Like every Silent Hill game, with the exception of 3, has been a dark. After 2, every Silent Hill game except for 3 has been the dark, brooding protagonist that has a bad past.
3 is underrated.
I didn't like 3 that much, but it was still good. I think 3 is a better game than 2, but 2 has that amazing story that you had never seen anything like it before. But 3 is the better game. Wasn't a big fan of Heather though, I gotta say. Just didn't like her that much, but whatever. Okay, now I'm thoroughly depressed and it's past midnight. Should we wrap this up?
Yes.
I want to go play some Evanescence music and play Castlevania and just feel bad about myself. But Pillars of Eternity.
I'm gonna go stop the moon. Pillars of Eternity is wonderful.
Yeah.
Also, I'm actually quite enjoying Majora's Mask, but I'll talk more about that in the next episode when I've probably finished it.
All right. Well, as always, thank you everybody for listening to the show, and be sure to give us some feedback. I'd like to get a little more messages, and I always will shill out the podcast. If you give us positive reviews on iTunes, I will read them and shill myself out. I'm no stranger to being a whore. We have, of course, Rhythm Encounter with Steven and Derek, so that gets all your music stuff. And then we actually have something new coming up. Mike, you want to talk about that?
Sure. This idea was hatched by some of the relatively new RPG fan hires because it's been in the planning stages for a few months now, but I think maybe by the time that this is out, we'll already have the first episode out, where there is going to be a new RPG fan podcast centered around sort of a not exactly a let's play, but sort of an RPG playing club. Have we 100% settled on the name yet, Stephen?
Yeah, it's going to be called Retro Encounter.
Okay, so
Thank God.
A new there was some discussion about what we should call it. But yeah, it's going to be called Retro Encounter, and it's going to have a rotating cast of hosts. Both Stephen and I are going to appear on early episodes. And the intro episode may already be out at the time of this release, but I'm not positive about that.
Cool. We have 3 podcasts, guys. You know what I was realizing the other day? We've been doing this show for 5 years.
Yep.
I am old.
We did this show with Kim when she still worked for us.
Yes, we did. Kim was on the show.
I joined RPG Fan in early 2012, about 3 years ago, because of this podcast.
See, I can never tell how many people are listening to this. I have a feeling that we're only like, it's like ham radio. I'm only broadcasting out to like 10 or 15 dudes, but whatever.
You'd be
That's-
surprised. A lot of people reach out to us. If you would use any form of social media, you would know that.
You guys know I don't trust social media.
Actually, no, you use Facebook, but you're a teacher. I understand.
Yeah, it is what it is. So, thanks again, everybody, for listening to the show, and we will see you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.